Name your price, David demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded boardrooms and broke men. He stepped closer, casting a long, imposing shadow over the cramped, fluorescent-lit hospital waiting area. $1 million? 5? A private island? You saved my mother's life tonight, Luna. I don't like being in debt. Tell me what you want, and it's yours. Luna didn't flinch. She slowly wiped a streak of drying blood from her cheek, her cheap scrubs ruined, her exhaustion bone-deep. She looked up at the towering man and the city whispered about as the ruthless alpha king of the financial district. I want you to step aside, Mr. Sterling, she said quietly, her voice perfectly steady. You're blocking the exit, and I have a morning shift. The rain had been falling in icy, diagonal sheets when the black Lincoln Town car was violently forced off the road. Luna remembered the sound first, a deafening crunch of metal twisting against concrete, followed by the sickening shatter of safety glass raining down onto the wet asphalt like scattered diamonds. She had been 3 blocks from her apartment, nursing a lukewarm coffee after a brutal 14-hour shift in the trauma ward at St. Jude's. Her feet ached, her mind was numb, and she had wanted nothing more than the quiet sanctuary of her bed. But the instinct honed by years of emergency medicine overrode her exhaustion before her conscious mind even registered that she was sprinting toward the wreckage. The offending vehicle, a heavy, unmarked SUV, was already reversing. Its tires smoked and screeched against the slick pavement before it sped away into the stormy night. A hit and run, or, as Luna would soon come to realize, a highly targeted strike. She reached the mangled Lincoln. The driver was slumped over the wheel, unconscious but breathing, effectively pinned by the deployed airbag. But it was the back seat that made the blood in Luna's veins run cold. An elegant, silver-haired woman lay awkwardly across the crushed leather interior. Her breath was shallow, a ragged, wet wheeze, and a steady, terrifying pulse of crimson was soaking rapidly through her designer silk blouse. An arterial laceration in her arm, compounded by what looked like a severe chest contusion. "Hey, stay with me," Luna commanded, her voice slicing cleanly through the heavy drumming of the rain. She wrenched the ruined, groaning door open, uncaring as the jagged metal tore at the sleeve of her wool coat. "Look at me. Keep your eyes open." The older woman blinked, her gaze hazy and unfocused. "David," she whispered, her voice barely a frayed thread. "Call David. We'll call whoever you want. But right now, you're going to focus on breathing," Luna said. She stripped off her own coat, then unwound her thick woolen scarf. She didn't hesitate for a microsecond, wrapping the scarf tightly above the laceration on the woman's arm, using a heavy metal pen from her pocket to twist it into a brutal, makeshift tourniquet. Blood coated Luna's hands, warm, sticky, and terrifyingly slick. The woman cried out, a weak, breathless sound of sudden agony. I know it hurts," Luna murmured, keeping her tone strictly level and authoritative. It was the anchor voice she used to keep absolute panic at bay in the ER. "Squeeze my hand. Squeeze it as hard as you can." Sirens began to wail in the distance, a haunting symphony echoing off the glass and steel high-rises of the financial district. But they were still minutes away, and the woman's pulse beneath Luna's fingers was growing alarmingly thready. Then, the very atmosphere in the street shifted. It wasn't the arrival of the paramedics that changed the air, but a tight convoy of 3 sleek, black SUVs that roared to a halt, violently boxing in the wreckage. Doors flew open before the heavy vehicles even fully stopped. Men in dark suits poured out into the storm, their movements sharp, frantic, yet terrifyingly disciplined. At the center of the chaos was David Sterling. Luna didn't know him by face, but she recognized him immediately by the sheer, suffocating gravity he commanded. The heavy rain seemed to literally part for him as he moved toward the wreckage. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that was rapidly getting soaked. His jaw clenched so tight, the muscles twitched under his skin. The city tabloids called him ruthless. His corporate rivals called him the King. Tonight, he just looked like a desperate man watching his entire world shatter. "Mother!" David's voice cracked like a whip, laced with a raw, uncharacteristic panic. He moved to physically push Luna aside, his large hand gripping her shoulder with a sudden, bruising force. "Get away from her." Luna shoved his heavy hand off with a sharp, violent motion, never taking her calculated pressure off the arterial wound. "If I move, she bleeds out in 60 seconds, she snapped, not even bothering to look up at him. "Unless you have a medical degree in that tailored suit, back the hell up and let me work." Dead silence fell over the perimeter. The heavy rain continued to fall, but the security detail froze entirely, staring in shock at the drenched woman in the cheap scrubs who had just barked a lethal order at David Sterling. David froze, his broad chest heaving. His dark, piercing eyes darted from his mother's pale face to the terrifying amount of blood coating Luna's arms, and then down to Luna's steady, unyielding expression. He saw the improvised tourniquet. He saw the calculated, life-saving pressure. He stepped back, just half a pace, a silent, agonizing concession. "Hold on, Mother," David said, his voice dropping to a gravelly murmur. He knelt directly into the wet glass beside the door, completely ignoring the absolute ruin of his bespoke clothes. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, seemingly afraid that touching her might break her further. The paramedics arrived seconds later, swarming the car with a chaotic efficiency. Luna gave them a rapid, highly clinical rundown of the injuries, the estimated blood loss, and the exact minute the tourniquet was applied. She stepped back, letting the professionals take over, suddenly feeling the freezing wind biting mercilessly through her thin scrubs. She watched them load the older woman onto the stretcher. Eleanor's pale hand weakly reached out, her fingers softly brushing the blood-stained sleeve of Luna's scrubs before the paramedics gently guided her arm back. "Thank you," the older woman mouthed silently, her eyes fluttering shut. David stood amidst the flashing red and blue lights, a dark, unmoving monolith. He was issuing low, sharp orders into a cell phone, his eyes meticulously tracking his mother's stretcher. But as the ambulance doors slammed closed, his gaze slowly turned. He locked eyes with Luna through the torrential rain. The look was entirely unreadable, heavy, piercing, and overwhelmingly intense. He didn't say a word, but the weight of his stare made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. He was a man who coldly categorized the world into assets and liabilities. Luna had just violently inserted herself into his meticulously controlled life, and neither of them knew what that meant yet. Luna simply turned on her heel, wrapped her arms around herself, and started the cold walk home. The fluorescent lights of the surgical waiting area buzzed with a sterile, maddening hum that set Luna's teeth on edge. She sat in a hard, unforgiving plastic chair, staring blankly at the small styrofoam cup of water resting between her scrubbed, yet still faintly pink hands. She should have gone home. Her own apartment was only a few blocks from the crash site, and her bed was calling to her. Yet, the severe adrenaline crash had anchored her to this spot, waiting out of pure professional habit for the surgical team's final verdict on Eleanor Sterling. The heavy double doors of the waiting room pushed open, not with a standard sigh of pneumatic hinges, but with a forceful, definitive swing that announced a commanding presence. David Sterling walked in. He looked strikingly different under the harsh, unforgiving hospital lighting. The rain had dried in his dark hair, leaving it slightly unruly. He had discarded his ruined suit jacket, revealing a white button-down shirt that was starkly stained with his mother's blood, where he had finally embraced her in the emergency bay. He looked deeply exhausted, yet tightly coiled, resembling a dangerous predator forced into an unnatural, brightly lit cage. His intimidating security detail remained stationed outside the glass doors, giving him a wide, highly private berth. David spotted her instantly. He crossed the quiet room, his long strides eating up the faded linoleum floor until he stood directly in front of her. Luna didn't stand up. She merely tilted her head back to look at him, her expression carefully guarded. For a long, tense moment, the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the cheap wall clock. He was studying her. Stripping away the residual blood and the oversized, damp scrubs, he noted the dark, bruising circles under her eyes, the stubborn, unyielding set of her jaw, and the remarkable way she refused to shrink under his intense gaze. Most people withered rapidly when David Sterling looked at them like that. "The head surgeon just came out," David said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated physically in the quiet room. "She made it through. They said she would have bled out on the street if the tourniquet hadn't been applied exactly when and how it was." "I'm glad to hear it," Luna said softly, genuine relief washing over her tight features. "She's incredibly tough." "She is." David shoved his large hands deep into his pockets, his broad shoulders unusually tense. He wasn't a man at all accustomed to expressing gratitude. In his cutthroat world, gratitude was a critical vulnerability. It meant you owed someone a debt. And David Sterling prided himself on owing absolutely no one. "My men ran your hospital badge while she was in surgery. Luna Vance, ER nurse, currently unattached to this specific hospital, walking home from a grueling shift at St. Jude's." Luna bristled immediately, her spine straightening against the hard plastic chair. "You investigated me?" "I protect what's mine. You laid hands on my mother. Of course, I investigated you." He stated it flatly, as if it were an undeniable, basic fact of nature. He slowly pulled a sleek, black leather checkbook from his inner breast pocket, uncapping a heavy gold fountain pen with a sharp, echoing click. "Name your price," David demanded, his voice dropping into that dangerous, commanding rumble that routinely controlled boardrooms and broke lesser men. He stepped an inch closer, casting a long, dominant shadow over her. "$1 million? 5? A private island? You saved my mother's life tonight, Luna. I don't like being in debt to anyone. Tell me what you want, and it's yours." The air between them suddenly grew thick, almost suffocating. He expected a sharp gasp of shock. He fully expected naked greed to flash in her dark eyes. He expected her to instantly begin calculating how entirely her mundane life was about to change. He had spent his entire adult life watching his vast wealth buy loyalty, silence, and absolute compliance. Luna didn't flinch. She slowly, deliberately stood up. She was nearly a full foot shorter than him, yet somehow, in that moment, she didn't seem small at all. She wiped a stray, forgotten streak of drying blood from her cheek. Her exhaustion was bone deep, but her eyes were bright with sudden, razor-sharp indignation. "I want you to step aside, Mr. Sterling," she said quietly, her voice perfectly, terrifyingly steady. "You're blocking the exit, and I have a morning shift." David's gold pen hovered over the crisp paper. A prominent muscle in his clenched jaw twitched. "You think this is some kind of negotiation test? I don't play games, Miss Vance. I am offering you complete financial freedom for the rest of your natural life. Take the money. It's not a game. Luna replied coldly, picking up her ruined, blood-stained coat from the chair beside her. I did my job. I acted as a decent human being. Not everything in this world has a neat little price tag attached to it, despite what your offshore bank statements might tell you. Everyone has a price. Then I guess you just haven't met everyone yet. Luna stepped purposefully around him, forcing him to pivot slightly to watch her. She could smell the faint trace of expensive, woody cologne mixed with the sharp metallic tang of blood on his shirt. She didn't look back as she walked away. Tell your mother I wish her a very speedy recovery. And stop running invasive background checks on women who help you. It's creepy. She pushed firmly through the swinging double doors, leaving him standing entirely alone in the dead center of the sterile room. David slowly lowered the pen. The pristine checkbook remained completely blank. He stared intently at the heavy doors, still gently swaying from her abrupt exit. For the first time in over a decade, David Sterling was completely, utterly speechless. He had offered her the entire world on a silver platter, and she had looked at it like it was a piece of dirty trash stuck to the bottom of her shoe. A strange, entirely unfamiliar sensation coiled tight in his chest. It wasn't anger. It was intrigue. A dangerous, all-consuming intrigue. His lead security detail, a heavily scarred man named Marcus, stepped quietly into the room. Sir, should we follow her? Make sure she signs a standard NDA regarding the attack? David kept his dark eyes locked on the empty doorway. The faint scent of her, fresh rainwater and cheap institutional hospital soapy, lingered stubbornly in the air. No, David murmured. A dark, deeply complicated shadow crossing his handsome features. He slowly clicked the gold pen closed, slipping it back into his pocket. Leave her alone. For now. But as he turned and walked down the long corridor toward his mother's recovery room, David knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that this wasn't the end. It was merely the inciting incident of something he couldn't yet define. Luna Vance had just openly, effortlessly refused his absolute control, and David Sterling never left a loose end unwrapped. The relentless, pulsing rhythm of St. Jude's emergency department was a chaotic symphony Luna knew intimately. It was a world constructed of blaring telemetry monitors, the sharp scent of industrial antiseptic, and the desperate, hurried footsteps of medical staff fighting back the tide of the city's worst nights. For 3 days following the incident with Eleanor Sterling, Luna threw herself into this grueling environment with a renewed, almost punishing vigor. She wanted to scrub the memory of David Sterling's piercing dark eyes and his blank checkbook from her mind entirely. She almost believed she had succeeded. Right up until the hospital's overhead intercom chimed with an unusually polite cadence. Nurse Vance to the Chief Administrator's office. Nurse Vance, please. Luna paused, a fresh bag of saline suspended in her hand. The Chief Administrator, Dr. Elias Thorne, occupied the plush, quiet top floor of the hospital. A pristine corporate realm completely detached from the gritty realities of the ER. Nurses were never summoned there unless they were facing a catastrophic malpractice suit or immediate termination. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She handed the saline to an attending intern, smoothed her rumpled scrubs, and made the long trek to the executive elevators. The air on the top floor was entirely different. Cool, meticulously filtered, and smelling faintly of lemon polish and expensive espresso. As Luna pushed open the heavy oak door to Dr. Thorne's expansive suite, she immediately understood why she had been called. David Sterling was sitting comfortably in one of the leather guest chairs. He was dressed in a flawlessly tailored navy suit that likely cost more than Luna's annual salary. looking like a sleek, apex predator resting casually in a very fragile glass house. Dr. Thorne, a usually pompous and unshakable man, was sweating visibly behind his massive mahogany desk, nervously shuffling a stack of embossed documents. David didn't stand when she entered, but his dark gaze instantly locked onto her. The suffocating weight of his attention hit her just as forcefully as it had in the sterile surgical waiting room. "Ah, Luna, please come in," Dr. Thorne stammered, his voice carrying an uncomfortable, artificial cheerfulness. "Sit down. We have some absolutely extraordinary news." "I prefer to stand, Dr. Thorne," Luna said, her voice cool and measured. She crossed her arms over her chest, deliberately keeping her distance from David. "What is this about?" "I have patients waiting in triage." "Mr. Sterling here." Thorne gestured toward David with a trembling hand. "Has just finalized a staggering philanthropic gesture. A $5 million absolute donation to St. Jude's, specifically earmarked for the complete modernization of the trauma and emergency department." Luna's breath hitched slightly. $5 million. It was a transformative, life-saving sum. It meant new MRI machines, updated surgical bays, and fully stocked supply closets that didn't run empty by mid-month. It was everything she and her colleagues desperately begged for during every budget meeting. "That is incredibly generous," Luna managed to say, her eyes darting suspiciously to David. "But I don't understand why I am here. Hospital funding is a board matter." David finally spoke, his deep baritone vibrating through the quiet, air-conditioned room. "The donation comes with a single, non-negotiable stipulation, Ms. Vance." He uncrossed his long legs and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The casual posture did nothing to diminish his imposing presence. "I don't trust bureaucratic committees to allocate my capital efficiently. The funds will be placed into a specialized trust, and you are going to oversee every single dollar of it." Luna stared at him, completely stunned. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," David replied smoothly. "You will be promoted to the head of Emergency Resource Management, effective immediately. You will decide which machines are purchased, which contractors are hired, and how the department is restructured. I am a floor nurse, Mr. Sterling. I treat patients. I don't sit in an office reviewing purchase orders. You know exactly what that department needs better than any administrator in this building." David countered, his tone perfectly level, yet utterly unyielding. "You demonstrated exceptional crisis management and decisive action under severe pressure on the street with my mother. You are capable, and more importantly, you are entirely incorruptible." Luna felt a flash of pure, white-hot anger. He hadn't accepted her refusal at the hospital. He had simply changed tactics. He couldn't buy her with a personal check, so he was cornering her morally. He was using her own deep, unwavering dedication to her patients to force her into his sphere of influence. "You're doing this to trap me," Luna accused, stepping forward, entirely ignoring Dr. Thorne's shocked gasp at her deeply unprofessional tone. "Because I walked away from you." David held her furious gaze without a flicker of remorse. "I am offering a severely underfunded hospital the means to save thousands of lives. Are you truly arrogant enough to let your personal pride turn away $5 million, Luna?" He had her. He knew it, and she knew it. The trap was masterfully constructed, utilizing her own empathy as the heavy steel bars. If she refused, she would have to look her exhausted colleagues in the eye and explain why she turned down their salvation. Silence stretched through the heavy, oak-paneled room. Luna's fingernails bit sharply into the palms of her hands. "Fine," Luna said softly, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. She glared down at him, her dark eyes flashing with a dangerous, defiant spark. "I'll manage your money, Mr. Sterling. But understand this. I am not your employee, I am not your asset, and I will not be your pawn. I report to the hospital, not to you." A faint, almost imperceptible smirk ghosted across David's lips. It wasn't a smile of victory, but one of deep, genuine fascination. "We shall see," he murmured. The transition from ER nurse to administrative overseer was abrupt, jarring, and thoroughly exhausting. By Friday night, Luna's head was pounding with the phantom echoes of vendor negotiations and equipment spreadsheets. She left St. Jude's long after the sun had set, stepping out into the chilly, unforgiving evening air. The city was painted in harsh, flickering neon and deep, ink-black shadows. Luna wrapped her thick woolen coat tighter around her shoulders, opting for the familiar 20-minute walk to her apartment rather than waiting for the unreliable transit system. She needed the biting cold to clear the bureaucratic fog from her mind. 2 blocks from the hospital, the hairs on the back of her neck suddenly stood at agonizing attention. It was a primal, deeply ingrained instinct. The sudden, chilling sensation of being actively hunted. Luna didn't look back immediately. She kept her pace steady, but all her senses dialed up to maximum sensitivity. Over the distant wail of a siren and the low hum of city traffic, she isolated a specific sound. The heavy, slow rumble of a high-performance engine rolling at a crawl. She discreetly glanced at a reflection in the darkened window of a closed bakery. A heavy, unmarked black SUV was pacing her exactly half a block behind. Its headlights were off, its windows tinted so darkly they absorbed the surrounding streetlights. It looked terrifyingly identical to the vehicle that had brutally rammed Eleanor Sterling's car off the road. Luna's heart began to hammer a frantic, violent rhythm against her ribs. "They know who I am." The thought flashed through her mind, cold and sharp as a scalpel. "I'm a witness." She forced herself not to run. Running triggered a predator's instinct to chase. Instead, she took a sudden, sharp right turn down a narrow cobblestone side street, hoping the tight space would prevent the heavy vehicle from following. She heard the squeal of heavy tires on the pavement. The SUV didn't try to navigate the alley. Instead, it aggressively blocked the entrance behind her. Luna broke into a sprint. The alley was dimly lit, reeking of damp cardboard and stale rain. Her sensible nursing shoes slapped against the wet stones. She fumbled desperately in her coat pocket for her phone, her fingers clumsy and numb with sudden, spiking adrenaline. Before she could pull it out, a tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped out from the deep shadows of a recessed doorway ahead of her, completely blocking her exit. Luna stopped dead, her breath coming in rapid white clouds in the cold air. She spun around. 2 men had exited the SUV and were walking briskly down the alley toward her. They were dressed in nondescript dark clothing, their faces obscured by the shadows. But their intent was sickeningly clear. She was trapped. "Hey, sweetheart," one of the men behind her called out, his voice a low, gravelly sneer. "We just want to ask you a few quick questions about what you saw the other night. No need to run." Luna backed herself tightly against the rough brick wall of the alley, raising her keys, sliding the sharpest metal key between her knuckles. It was a pathetic defense against 3 grown men, but she refused to go down quietly. "Stay away from me," Luna commanded, channeling every ounce of her ER anchor voice, though it trembled slightly at the edges. The man in front of her chuckled, taking a menacing step forward into the dim light. He never took a second step. From the fire escape above, a heavy, silent mass dropped with terrifying precision. It was Marcus. the heavily scarred security chief Luna had briefly seen at the hospital. He landed directly behind the man in front of Luna, his thick arm wrapping around the assailant's throat in a lightning-fast, brutal chokehold. With a sharp, sickening twist of his hips, Marcus dragged the man backward into the shadows. Simultaneously, the blinding high-beam headlights of a sleek silver Maybach flooded the alleyway from the far end, pinning the other two attackers in a stark, blinding glare. The heavy doors of the Maybach swung open. 3 more impeccably dressed, highly lethal-looking men poured out, moving with terrifying, synchronized efficiency. They descended upon the 2 attackers before the men could even draw the weapons hidden beneath their jackets. The confrontation was over in less than 10 seconds. A flurry of calculated strikes, muffled groans, and the heavy thud of bodies hitting the cold pavement. Luna remained pressed against the brick wall, her chest heaving, her wide eyes taking in the absolute, controlled violence. Then, the rear door of the Maybach opened, and David Sterling stepped out into the harsh illumination. He wore a dark wool overcoat over a charcoal suit, looking like an avenging, dark god descending into the squalor of the city. He didn't spare a single glance for the men groaning on the wet cobblestones. His furious, intense gaze was locked entirely on Luna. He crossed the alley in a few long strides, stopping just inches from her. The anger radiating off him was almost palpable, heating the freezing air between them. "Are you hurt?" David demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl that commanded immediate compliance. Luna shook her head weakly, the adrenaline rapidly draining from her system, leaving her violently trembling. No, I'm okay." She looked up at him, her fear suddenly crystallizing into sharp, burning outrage. "You were having me followed." "I was keeping you alive," David fired back, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack bone. He reached out, his large hands gripping her shoulders. The touch was surprisingly gentle despite his fury, anchoring her shaking frame. "The men who hit my mother are professionals. They tie up loose ends. You were the only witness who got a look at their vehicle." "You dragged me into this," Luna yelled, shoving at his chest, though it was like pushing against solid granite. "First the hospital, now this. I told you to leave me alone." "And I told you I protect what's mine," David said softly, his dark eyes burning into hers with an intensity that made the breath catch in her throat. He didn't let her go. "Your apartment isn't safe. Your life as you knew it ended the moment you put your hands on my mother's bleeding arm." "I am not going anywhere with you," she stated stubbornly, even as her knees threatened to buckle. "Yes, you are," David replied, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. He shifted his grip, sliding his arm firmly around her waist to support her weight. "Because if I leave you here, you're dead by morning. And I refuse to let that happen." The interior of the Maybach was as silent as a tomb. The heavily armored glass blocked out the chaotic wail of the sirens responding to the alleyway skirmish left far behind them. Luna sat stiffly against the plush leather, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their residual trembling. David sat opposite her, an impenetrable wall of dark wool and silent fury, his broad shoulders consuming the space. He hadn't spoken since effectively shoving her into the vehicle. He was furiously typing on a secure, encrypted mobile device, his thumb striking the screen with enough force to crack it. "Where are you taking me?" Luna finally asked, her voice raspy. David didn't look up from his screen. "Somewhere secure. My primary residence. The perimeter is monitored by a private tactical team, and the elevator requires biometric clearance. I don't have clothes. I don't have my toothbrush. My cat Barnaby hasn't been fed." Luna listed, her tone rising in a desperate attempt to cling to the mundane realities of her life. The life that was rapidly spiraling out of her grasp. David finally lowered the phone, his dark, piercing eyes meeting hers in the dim cabin light. "My staff will retrieve your feline. A personal shopper will have a wardrobe delivered by morning. Anything else you require can be acquired within the hour." He leaned slightly forward. "What you need to understand, Luna, is that the men in that alley were foot soldiers for Julian Thorne. He's a venture capitalist who specializes in hostile takeovers. He has been trying to break my mother's resolve on a specific board vote for months." Luna blinked, the name triggering a faint memory. Dr. Elias Thorne, the hospital administrator. Julian's younger, far less ambitious brother, David confirmed coldly. "Julian couldn't legally force my mother off the board, so he attempted to permanently remove her. You interrupted a multi-billion-dollar assassination. Those men weren't there to intimidate you. They were there to erase you." The cold, clinical way he delivered the terrifying truth made Luna's stomach bottom out. She looked away, staring blankly at the blur of city lights. "So, I'm a prisoner in your fortress now." "You are a protected guest," David corrected smoothly, though the absolute authority in his voice blurred the line entirely. The Maybach smoothly descended into a subterranean, brightly lit parking structure beneath a towering glass skyscraper. Minutes later, the private elevator deposited them directly into David's penthouse. Luna stepped out into an expansive, breathtaking space. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture. Soaring ceilings, stark concrete pillars, and massive floor-to-ceiling windows offering a dizzying, panoramic view of the city skyline. Yet, despite the undeniable luxury, the air felt sterile. There were no photographs, no personal touches, no signs of warmth. It was a fortress of solitude disguised as a billionaire's playground. David shed his overcoat, tossing it carelessly over a minimalist slate sofa. He walked straight to a sleek glass bar, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass. He downed it in a single, sharp swallow. "There are 3 guest suites down the east corridor," David said, his back still turned to her. "Pick whichever you prefer. Marcus will be stationed at the elevator doors." Luna remained stubbornly near the entrance, her arms crossed tight over her chest. "How long, David?" The use of his first name, spoken with such exhausted defiance, made him pause. He turned slowly, leaning his hip against the bar. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline finally leaving his system to reveal the heavy toll of the past few days. "Until Julian Thorne is legally neutralized," David answered quietly. "My legal team and private investigators are compiling the evidence from tonight's attack. It will take time to build an airtight RICO case that the district attorney cannot ignore. I am a nurse," Luna stated, taking a slow step toward him. Her fear was beginning to burn away, replaced by the familiar, stubborn fire that defined her. "I save lives. I don't hide in glass towers while other people fight my battles. I accepted your absurd promotion, but I refuse to sit here like a terrified bird in a cage." David set the crystal glass down with a sharp clack. In 2 long strides, he crossed the room, stopping mere inches from her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "You don't understand the rules of this game, Luna," David murmured, his voice dangerously soft. "People in my world do not play fair. They exploit vulnerabilities. And right now, you are the most glaring vulnerability I have." Luna tilted her chin up, refusing to back down from his imposing height. "I am not yours to be vulnerable about." "You saved my mother," David said, his jaw tightening, his dark eyes tracing the stubborn line of her jaw. "That makes you my responsibility, and I do not fail my responsibilities. You will stay here. You will be safe. That is not a request." Luna stared into his unyielding eyes, seeing the deep, fractured fear he tried to mask with ruthless authority. She saw a man terrified of losing the people he cared about. "I'll stay tonight," Luna whispered softly, diffusing the explosive tension with a measured, clinical calm. She watched a flicker of surprise cross his features. "But tomorrow, I am going to work. You can send your army with me if you must, but you will not stop my life." She turned and walked down the east corridor without waiting for his permission, leaving the Alpha King standing alone in the vast, echoing silence of his own making. Morning arrived with the muted, elegant hum of city traffic filtering through the thick glass of the penthouse. Luna awoke in a bed large enough to sleep a family of 4, the sheets woven from impossibly soft Egyptian cotton. True to David's word, Barnaby the cat was sleeping soundly at the foot of the bed, entirely unbothered by his sudden elevation in real estate. On a sleek chair nearby sat a row of garment bags, housing a meticulously curated selection of professional attire. Luna ignored the designer dresses, opting for a crisp, tailored black suit that felt like modern armor. She pinned her dark hair up in a severe, no-nonsense twist. When she entered the sprawling, sunlit kitchen, David was already sitting at the massive marble island, a tablet in one hand and a cup of black coffee in the other. He wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, looking sharp, composed, and entirely unfazed by the previous night's violence. "Marcus will drive you," David said without looking up from his screen. "He will remain with you at all times. If you leave the administrative floor, he follows." "Good morning to you too," Luna replied dryly, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She leaned against the marble counter. "I don't need a bodyguard to review supply manifests. You require a bodyguard to breathe the air outside this building," David countered calmly, finally meeting her gaze. A brief, unreadable spark flashed in his dark eyes as he took in her sharp, professional appearance. "Do not argue with Marcus. He lacks my infinite patience." An hour later, Luna found herself back at St. Jude's, ensconced in a surprisingly plush office that smelled of fresh paint. True to David's warning, the imposing, heavily scarred Marcus stood like a silent gargoyle outside her frosted glass door. Luna booted up the high-end computer on her desk. She had $5 million of David Sterling's money to allocate, and she intended to use every single cent to fortify the emergency department. But as she began cross-referencing the hospital's current supply contracts with their astronomical failure rates, an icy knot formed in her stomach. It wasn't just administrative incompetence. The shortages that plagued St. Jude's, the lack of IV fluids, the broken monitors, the inexplicably delayed shipments of vital surgical tools were entirely systemic. Luna pulled up the master vendor ledger, her eyes scanning the dense rows of data. Almost 70% of the hospital's critical supplies were funneled through a single, recently acquired logistics firm, Apex Medical Supply. Frowning, Luna opened a secondary browser window and ran a deep background search on Apex Medical. It was a labyrinth of corporate jargon and parent companies. She clicked through 3 layers of shell corporations, her mind working with the same rapid diagnostic precision she used in a trauma bay. She hit the final, originating parent company, Thorn Global Holdings. Luna stopped breathing. Her hand froze over the mouse. Julian Thorn, the man who ordered the hit on Eleanor Sterling, the man whose brother, Dr. Elias Thorn, was the chief administrator of this very hospital. The pieces snapped together with a terrifying, violent clarity. St. Jude's wasn't simply failing. It was being intentionally strangled. Julian Thorne was using his brother's position and his own logistics company to systematically bleed the hospital dry, likely driving it toward bankruptcy so his venture capital firm could buy the prime city real estate for pennies on the dollar. And David Sterling's massive, sudden donation had just inadvertently saved the hospital from the brink, completely destroying Thorne's elaborate scheme. Luna's heart hammered against her ribs. She wasn't just a random witness anymore. By accepting this job and taking control of the funding, she had unwittingly placed herself directly between a ruthless corporate predator and his multi-million-dollar prize. The heavy, frosted glass door of her office suddenly swung open. Luna jumped, her hand instinctively flying to her chest. Dr. Elias Thorne stood in the doorway, his usually pompous demeanor replaced by a strained, slick smile that didn't reach his cold, nervous eyes. "Ms. Vance?" Dr. Thorne said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him, completely ignoring Marcus's dark glare from the hallway. "Settling in, I see. I thought we should have a private chat about your immediate purchasing priorities." Luna slowly minimized the browser window, her blood running cold. She looked up at the administrator, realizing with horrifying certainty that the enemy wasn't just in the shadows of an alleyway. The enemy was standing right inside her hospital. Dr. Elias Thorne's smile was as perfectly constructed as a porcelain mask, and just as hollow. He stood between Luna and the heavy frosted glass door, his hands clasped casually in front of him. To any casual observer, he was merely a supportive administrator checking in on a new department head, but Luna saw the slight tremor in his fingers and the cold, calculating sheen in his eyes. "Dr. Thorne," Luna said, forcing her voice to remain entirely level. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair, resting her hands flat on the desk to hide the way her knuckles had turned white. "What can I do for you?" "I was just reviewing the historical supply manifests." Elias's smile tightened a fraction of an inch. "Ah, yes. The manifests. Tedious work, I assure you. I came to offer my guidance. A $5 million budget is a massive undertaking for someone with, well, strictly clinical experience. I thought we could streamline the process, keep our current, reliable vendors in place to avoid disrupting patient care." Reliable vendors, Luna thought, her blood running like ice water in her veins. Apex Medical, your brother's shell company. Continuity is important. Luna agreed smoothly, playing the exact role of the naive nurse he expected her to be. She casually clicked a folder on her desktop, effectively burying the browser window that linked him to the assassination attempt on Eleanor Sterling. However, Mr. Sterling's legal team was very clear about conducting a baseline audit before I authorize any new purchase orders. It's standard practice for a philanthropic trust. Elias stepped closer to the desk, the faint scent of his expensive, peppery cologne invading her space. "Of course, but we must consider the urgency. The ER is severely depleted. Apex Medical can have a fleet of delivery trucks here by tomorrow morning, provided we expedite the invoices today. I can authorize them right now, saving you the administrative headache." He was trying to secure the money before she could freeze the accounts. He was desperate. Luna met his gaze squarely, channeling the unyielding authority she used to command a chaotic trauma bay. "I appreciate the offer, Dr. Thorne, but I cannot sign off on an expedited invoice when Apex Medical has a documented 30% failure rate on sterile equipment delivery over the last fiscal quarter. I will be putting the contract out for an emergency open bid this afternoon." The porcelain mask finally cracked. Elias's face flushed a mottled, angry red. For a terrifying second, the polished administrator vanished, replaced by a man backed into a very dangerous corner. He planted both hands heavily on her desk, leaning over her. "You are overstepping, Miss Vance," Elias hissed, his voice dropping the polite facade entirely. "You are a floor nurse playing a game you do not comprehend. You will authorize the Apex invoices by noon, or I will have you removed from this hospital by security for gross insubordination." Luna didn't shrink back. Instead, she stood up, forcing him to look her in the eye. "I report to the Sterling Trust, Dr. Thorne, not to you. If you attempt to have me removed, I will immediately freeze the entire $5 million fund and pending a full federal audit of your historical ledger. Now, please step away from my desk." Elias stared at her, genuine shock mingling with naked fury. He slowly straightened up, his chest heaving. "You are making a catastrophic mistake," he murmured darkly. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the office, slamming the frosted glass door so hard the frame rattled. The moment he was gone, Luna's knees gave out. She sank back into her chair, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. She couldn't stay here. The hospital was compromised. She grabbed her coat and practically sprinted to the door, throwing it open to find Marcus standing exactly where she had left him, his dark eyes instantly scanning her pale face. "We need to leave. Now," Luna said breathlessly. Marcus didn't ask questions. He merely tapped a discreet earpiece, spoke a single code word, and fell into step beside her, a heavy, impenetrable shield between her and the rest of the world. 20 minutes later, the private elevator chimed, depositing Luna into the cavernous, sunlit living room of David's penthouse. David was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, speaking rapidly in French on his mobile phone. The moment he saw Luna, he ended the call, tossing the device onto a nearby glass table. His sharp gaze immediately zeroed in on her disheveled state and the residual panic still lingering in her eyes. "What happened?" David demanded, crossing the vast room in seconds. Luna didn't bother with a preamble. "Elias Thorne, the hospital administrator. I traced the hospital's primary supply vendor through 3 shell corporations. It's owned by Julian Thorne. Elias just tried to corner me into funneling your donation directly into his brother's company." David stopped dead, his imposing frame going perfectly still. The silence in the penthouse became absolute, heavy and suffocating. When he finally spoke, his voice was a terrifyingly soft whisper. "The hospital isn't just a real estate target," David deduced, his brilliant, ruthless mind snapping the pieces together instantly. "It's a laundering front. Julian is using the inflated medical supply contracts to wash his illicit capital, and Elias is facilitating it from the inside." He looked at Luna, his dark eyes wide with a sudden, horrifying realization. "And you just threatened to audit his books." "I told him I was freezing the funds," Luna confirmed, her voice trembling slightly as the reality of her actions settled in. "He knows I'm onto him, David." "Damn it, Luna," David roared, the explosive sound shattering the quiet room. He ran a hand forcefully through his dark hair, turning away from her as a terrifying wave of panic rolled off him. "I told you to review equipment, not play amateur detective. You just painted a target on your back for a man who tried to murder my mother in cold blood." "I am trying to save my hospital," Luna fired back, her own fear turning to defensive anger. "I couldn't just hand him your money." David spun back around, closing the distance between them until he was mere inches away. His chest heaved beneath his tailored shirt. He reached out, his large hands gripping her upper arms, not tight enough to hurt, but firm enough to anchor her completely to him. "I don't care about the money," David said, his voice ragged, entirely stripped of its usual cool authority. "I care about you. If Julian knows you are a threat to his operation, he will not hesitate to eliminate you. Do you understand me? You are not going back to St. Jude's. Luna looked up into his dark eyes, stunned by the raw, unguarded terror she saw there. The Alpha King, the man who controlled half the city, was terrified of losing her. David, she whispered, the fight draining out of her. You stay here, he commanded softly, his thumbs unconsciously tracing the soft fabric of her coat. My team will rip Julian Thorne's empire apart piece by piece, but you are out of the game, Luna. I won't lose you. For the first time since the night in the rain, Luna didn't pull away from his touch. She simply nodded, allowing the heavy, complicated truth of his words to settle between them. Thank you so much for reading She Saved the Alpha King's Mother and Became the One Thing He Couldn't Control. If you enjoyed this journey of high-stakes tension, unwavering bravery, and fierce romance, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment below letting us know your favorite moment, and stay tuned for more dramatic, original stories coming soon.